A foot hit a dog. The dog was thin-ribbed, showing, ears flat, belly pressed to wet pavement. The foot belonged to a man in a stained undershirt, stocky, maybe 200 pounds. A second man stood behind him, taller, hands on hips. Watching. The foot drew back again. Across the street, a restaurant door opened. Bruce Lee walked out. He was still chewing. That's the detail that survived the chain. Bruce was still chewing his food when he came through the door. He hadn't swallowed the last bite. He hadn't finished his tea. He hadn't waited for the check. There was money on the table behind him, bills, all of it, whatever was in his pocket, and the door was swinging shut and the warm light from inside cut a yellow stripe across the wet pavement, and Bruce walked through that stripe and into the dark. Still chewing. The stocky man's foot came forward. It connected with the dog's midsection, ribs, belly, the soft place where architecture meets organs, and the dog screamed. Not barked. Screamed. The sound an animal makes when the pain is not the first pain, when the body has already taken the earlier blows and the nervous system has stopped flinching and started just receiving. Bruce crossed the street. 15 feet. Wet pavement. Neon reflections sliding under his shoes, pink, green, the vertical glow of Chinese characters from a sign overhead. Bruce crossed those 15 feet the way he crossed every distance, straight, fast, no wasted motion. His hands were at his sides. Both open. He was wearing dark trousers and a fitted short-sleeved shirt and leather shoes that didn't make a sound on the wet ground because Bruce Lee's feet never made sound on any ground. That was the thing about him. Every person who ever trained with him said the same thing. The feet were silent. The feet had a private arrangement with whatever surface they touched. The stocky man didn't see him coming. The stocky man's foot was midway through its next arc, the third kick or the fourth or the fifth. The chain doesn't carry the count, and the foot was halfway to the dog when the man's peripheral vision caught movement and the man turned his head and Bruce was 4 feet away. 4 feet. Close enough to smell the man's sweat. Close enough to count the stains on the undershirt. The foot came down. Not to kick. The kick died. The foot returned to the pavement because the foot's owner had just discovered that someone was standing 4 feet from him and that someone had not been there 2 seconds ago and that someone was looking at him. Bruce had stopped. Not gradually. Not with a deceleration. Bruce had been moving and then Bruce was still, the way a projected image stops when someone hits pause. 1 frame, motion. Next frame, nothing. And the nothing was worse than the motion because the motion told you what he could do and the nothing told you what he was choosing not to do. The taller man, the audience, the one who had been watching the kicking the way you watch someone else's chore, the taller man stepped back. Nobody had touched him. Nobody had spoken to him. Bruce hadn't looked at him yet. But the man's body understood something his mind hadn't processed. The arithmetic of this street had changed. 2 men and a dog had been one equation. 2 men and a dog in Bruce Lee was a different equation. The man's legs did the math before his brain did. Bruce looked at the stocky man. Eyes level. Jaw still working on the last of the food. Hands at his sides, open, fingers loose. The look was not anger. The look was not the narrowed eyes and clenched jaw of a movie confrontation. The look was simpler than that. The look was attention. The pure, undiluted attention of a nervous system that has locked onto a target and is processing data, and the data is you. You and what you were doing. You and the dog on the ground. You and the sound that came through a restaurant window and interrupted a man's dinner. Bruce swallowed. That was the moment. Not the crossing. Not the stopping. The swallowing. Because the swallowing was Bruce's body finishing one task before beginning another. The mouth had held the food. The throat took it down. The mouth was empty now. The body was done with dinner. The body was available. The stocky man opened his mouth. He said something, a word, a phrase. The chain doesn't carry it. His hands came up. Not fists. Palms out. The universal gesture of a man who has been caught. Wait, hold on, what is this? The I wasn't doing anything gesture. Bruce didn't answer. Bruce took one step forward. One step. Not a lunge. The distance went from 4 feet to 2.5. At 2.5 feet, the stocky man could see the texture of Bruce's shirt. At 2.5 feet, the stocky man could see Bruce's forearms. The forearms. I need to talk about the forearms because the forearms are what ended this. Not a punch. Not a kick. Not a word. Bruce Lee's forearms were not ordinary forearms. They were the product of a wooden dummy hit 10,000 times, of iron rings gripped until the tendons stood up like bridge cables, of wrist curls done until the veins surfaced and stayed. The forearms were visible the way the engineering of a loaded structure is visible. You didn't need to know martial arts to read them. You needed to know force. You needed to know what a human body looks like when it has been built for a single purpose, and the purpose is evident in every cord and ridge from the elbow to the wrist. The stocky man saw the forearms. The stocky man's mouth closed. The forearms were at Bruce's sides, passive, doing nothing, just hanging there the way forearms hang, but they were 2.5 feet from the stocky man's face, and the stocky man understood what 2.5 feet meant. 2.5 feet was the distance between looking at those forearms and feeling them. The stocky man understood that this distance could become zero at a speed he would not be able to track. The taller man was already gone. Somewhere between the first step and the second, the taller man had made a decision, and the decision was distance, and the distance was growing, and the taller man was walking away into the crowd in the neon and the wet night. He was there and then he wasn't. The chain doesn't say he ran. The chain says he wasn't there anymore. Bruce spoke. One word. Maybe two. The chain doesn't carry them. Whatever Bruce said left his mouth and entered the stocky man's ears and did something inside the stocky man's skull, rearranged something, flipped something, turned some dial from whatever it had been set to before to a new setting, and the stocky man stepped back. One step. Then another. Then the stocky man turned and walked away. Not ran. Walked. Walked down the wet street with the neon reflections under his feet, walked past the food carts and the bicycles and the hanging laundry, walked into the part of Kowloon where men go when they are finished being looked at by Bruce Lee. Bruce looked down. The dog was on the pavement. Ribs visible. Ears flat. Body pressed low, belly on the ground, legs out. The posture of an animal that has learned that the ground is the safest place because the ground is the lowest place and the lowest place is where the kicks can't reach. The dog was shaking. The fine, constant tremor of a body trying to reset itself, trying to find the settings it had before the pain began. Bruce crouched. Bruce Lee crouched on a wet street in Kowloon next to a shaking dog and put his hand out. Palm down. Fingers together. Not reaching. Not grabbing. Just extended. The hand said, "Here." The hand said, "If you want." The dog's nose moved. Toward the hand. Stopped. Moved again. Stopped. The nose touched Bruce's fingers. My father heard this from a man who was at a dinner where someone who had been in that restaurant told the story. The chain is 4 hands. 4 hands is short. Short chains keep the grain. But my father's words can wait. Right now there's a dog on wet pavement and Bruce Lee's hand is out and the dog's nose has just touched his fingers and the dog has not decided yet whether this hand is safe. Bruce didn't move. The dog's nose stayed on his fingertips, 1 second, 2, 3, and then the nose pressed forward, past the fingers, into the palm. The dog's head came up. 1 inch. 2 inches. The ears stayed flat but the head rose and the eyes looked at Bruce and Bruce looked at the dog. Bruce stayed crouched. The wet pavement soaking through his trousers at the knees. The neon signs reflecting pink and green in the puddles around him. The sound of Kowloon traffic, voices, a kitchen clanging somewhere behind a wall, all of it continuing, all of it indifferent, and in the center of all of it a man crouched next to a dog with his hand out and his palm open and his body completely still. He stayed. The man who could move faster than anyone, the man who could close a distance before you knew the distance existed, who could strike before you knew a strike was coming, whose entire body was an engine built for the elimination of hesitation, that man stayed crouched on wet pavement and waited for a dog to decide. The dog decided. The trembling slowed. Not stopped, slowed. The long tremors became short ones and the short ones became pauses and the pauses grew longer and in one of the pauses the dog's tongue came out and touched Bruce's wrist. 1 lick. Quick. The way a dog tests a surface, is this warm, is this safe, is this a thing that will hurt me or is this a thing that will not? Bruce's fingers moved. Slowly. The fingers curled, not closed, not gripping, just curled inward, and the fingertips touched the top of the dog's head. Between the ears. The place where dogs feel hands. Bruce's fingertips rested there, light, barely pressure, the way you would touch something that might break. The dog's ears came up. Not all the way. Not the full alert of a healthy dog hearing a sound. But up. Off the skull. Away from flat. The ears went from terror to caution and caution was an improvement and the improvement was Bruce's hand. I need to go back. Before the street. Before the door. Before the money on the table and the food still in Bruce's mouth. I need to go back to the inside of the restaurant. Bruce was eating. In Kowloon, in the mid-60s, at a restaurant with a window that faced the street. The window was the kind you see in that part of the city, wide, single pane, slightly fogged from the heat of the kitchen inside meeting the damp of the evening outside. Through the fog you could see the street. Through the street you could see the neon. Through the neon you could see movement, bodies, carts, the occasional bicycle weaving between pedestrians. Bruce was sitting with his back to the window. This matters. Bruce was not watching the street. Bruce was eating his food and his back was to the glass and whatever was happening outside was happening behind him. The sound came through the glass. Bruce heard it before he identified it. That's how sound works, the ear receives and the brain decodes and there's a gap between the receiving and the decoding, a gap measured in milliseconds, and in that gap the body has already begun to respond. The body doesn't wait for the brain to name the sound. The body responds to the frequency, the pitch, the texture of the sound, and the texture of this sound was pain. Animal pain. The kind of sound that bypasses language and enters the body through a door that evolution left open. Bruce turned. He turned in his chair, not stood, not yet, just turned, and he looked through the window. Through the fog on the glass. Through the fog he saw 2 shapes and a third shape. Two shapes standing, one shape on the ground. One of the standing shapes moved a leg, a foot, the arc of a kick, and the shape on the ground made the sound again, and the sound came through the glass again. Bruce's hands went to the table. Flat. Palms down on the surface. The way a man puts his hands on a table when the man is about to push himself up. The gesture that comes before standing. The body's preparation for vertical. Bruce pushed himself up and reached into his pocket in the same motion. Money came out. Bills. He put the bills on the table next to his plate. All of it. Everything in his pocket. He didn't count. He didn't separate. He didn't calculate the cost of the meal and subtract it from the total and leave an appropriate remainder. He put all of it down because all of it was faster than some of it, and right now speed mattered more than arithmetic. Bruce walked to the door. He walked through the restaurant, past the tables. Past the diners, past the waiter carrying a tray of something steaming, and Bruce was chewing. He was still chewing the last bite he had taken before the sound came through the glass. The food was in his mouth and the food was being processed by his teeth, and the processing was continuing even as Bruce's legs carried him to the door, because Bruce's body did not waste time. Bruce's body did not stop one operation to begin another. Bruce's body ran operations in parallel. The teeth worked the food. The legs worked the distance. The hands pushed the door. The door opened. The warm light cut a stripe on the wet pavement. Bruce stepped through. He did not pause in the doorway. He did not assess the situation from a safe distance. He did not wait to see if the kicking would stop on its own. Bruce went through the door and into the street the way water goes through a broken pipe, because the opening exists and the pressure is there, and the water does not consider the opening. The water goes through. 15 feet of wet street between the door and the men. Bruce covered the 15 feet. Behind him the door swung shut and the warm light narrowed to a sliver and then to nothing, and Bruce was in the dark of the street with the neon and the wet and the two men and the dog. I told you what happened next. I told you about the 4 feet and the stillness and the forearms and the word and the man walking away and the dog's nose on Bruce's fingers. But I haven't told you about the sound. The sound. The first sound. The sound that came through the glass and hit Bruce's ear and traveled down the canal and hit the drum and became a signal. That sound. That sound is the engine of this entire story. Without that sound, Bruce finishes his dinner. Without that sound, the money stays in Bruce's pocket. Without that sound, two men kick a dog on a street in Kowloon and no one crosses. No one comes through a door. No one crouches on wet pavement with their hand out. The sound changed everything. I think about what that means. Bruce was in a restaurant. Bruce was eating food. Bruce was, for that moment, for that 10 or 15 or 20 minutes of sitting at a table and picking up food and putting food in his mouth, Bruce was off duty. Bruce was not in a school. Bruce was not in a ring. Bruce was not in a confrontation or a demonstration or a scene in a film. Bruce was a man eating dinner. And a sound came through a window. And the man eating dinner was gone. And the thing that replaced him, the thing that stood up and put money on the table and walked through the restaurant and opened the door and crossed the street and stopped 4 feet from a man twice his size with its hands open and its forearms visible, the thing was not a man eating dinner. That thing was something else. That thing was the Bruce that lived underneath the dinner Bruce, the Bruce that was always there, the Bruce that was always listening, always processing, always running the calculation of the world around him and waiting, not hoping, not looking, just waiting for the calculation to produce a result that required action. The sound was the result. The action was the door. My father told me this story in his workshop. He was sorting screws into jars, small ones in the jar on the left, medium ones in the jar in the center, large ones on the right. His fingers moved without looking. His eyes were on the wall or on the middle distance or on wherever eyes go when a man is telling a story he has told before, and the telling is automatic, like the sorting. He put all the money on the table, my father said. All of it. We'll come back to that workshop. Right now we're on a street in Kowloon and there's money on a table inside a restaurant, and the money is important and I need to explain why. Bruce Lee was not a rich man in the mid-60s. Bruce Lee was a man who had money sometimes and didn't have money other times, and the sometimes and the other times were close together and unpredictable. Bruce was teaching. Bruce was doing small parts in television, a guest role here, a bit there, the kind of work that pays you enough to eat for 2 weeks and then pays you nothing for 3. Bruce was supporting a household on the income of a man whose talent was enormous and whose opportunities had not yet caught up with his talent. Money mattered to Bruce in the mid-60s. Money mattered the way it matters to anyone who doesn't have enough of it, not as a concept, not as a goal, but as a daily mechanical reality. You have this much. The meal costs this much. The difference between this much and this much is what goes back in your pocket, and what goes back in your pocket is what stands between you and the next meal. Bruce put all of it on the table. All of it. Not the cost of the meal. Not the cost of the meal plus a reasonable tip. All of it. Every bill in his pocket. Bruce put all of it on the table because Bruce was not doing arithmetic. Bruce was doing something else. Bruce was clearing a debt, not to the restaurant. The restaurant would get paid regardless. The bills on the table were more than enough. Bruce was clearing a debt to the moment. The moment required him to stand. The moment required him to walk. The moment required him to go through a door and across a street. And the moment did not include counting money. The moment did not include reaching into a pocket twice. The moment included one reach, one pull, one placement, and then movement. Bruce moved through the world like this. Bruce moved through the world as if every action had a cost, and the cost was time, and time was the one currency Bruce refused to waste. Other people reached into their pocket, pulled out bills, counted, separated, put some on the table, put the rest back. 4 actions. Maybe 5. Maybe 6 if the bills were crumpled and needed uncrumpling. Bruce did 1 action. Hand in pocket. Bills out. Bills on table. Done. 3 motions that were really 1 motion. The way Bruce's punches were really 1 motion, the chamber and the extension and the impact compressed into a single event that the eye could not break into parts. The money on the table. All of it. I think about Bruce walking through the restaurant with an empty pocket. I think about Bruce crossing the street with no money. I think about Bruce crouching on wet pavement next to a dog with nothing in his pocket, no bills, no coins, no buffer between himself and the cost of whatever came next. Bruce gave the restaurant everything he had, and then Bruce walked into a situation that might have cost him more, a fight, an injury, a police report, a night he hadn't planned for, and Bruce walked into it empty. That's the money. That's why my father repeated it. Because my father was a man who always knew what was in his pocket. My father was a man who never left a restaurant without knowing exactly how much was left. My father was a man who kept a buffer. My father understood that the world was unpredictable, and the buffer was the thing that stood between you and the unpredictable, and you did not throw the buffer on a table and walk out. You kept the buffer. You always kept the buffer. Bruce didn't keep the buffer. Bruce threw the buffer on the table and walked into the night with empty pockets and open hands, and he crouched next to a dog, and the dog's nose touched his fingers, and the dog decided that the hand was safe. My father told me this while sorting screws. Small ones left. Medium center. Large right. His fingers didn't stop. That's how you knew, my father said. That's how you knew it was real. He put all the money down. A man who's thinking doesn't do that. A man who's planning doesn't do that. Only a man who's already gone does that. Bruce was already gone before he stood up. Bruce was already on the street before he left the chair. The money was just, my father dropped a screw into the large jar. The money was just the receipt. I need to tell you how this story reached me. I need to tell you about the hands it passed through, because the hands matter. The hands are the story. My father heard this from a man. The man, I'm going to call him by what he was, not by his name, because the man is alive and the man didn't agree to be in this story. The man was at a dinner. The dinner was sometime after Bruce died. July 1973. The dinner was weeks after or months after. The chain doesn't carry the interval. The dinner was in someone's home. The people at the dinner were people who had known Bruce. Not fans. Not students who had trained with him for 3 months and then told everyone they were Bruce Lee's students. People who had known him. People who had been in rooms with him. People who had eaten with him and argued with him and watched him move and watched him sit still and watched him do the thing that Bruce did, which was fill a room with his presence the way a sound fills a room, not by being loud but by being the frequency that every surface in the room vibrates to. These people were at a dinner. They were eating and drinking and talking. And the talking was about Bruce, because the talking was always about Bruce at gatherings like this, in those weeks and months after he died, because Bruce was the hole in the room. Bruce was the shape that wasn't there. Every conversation at that table curved toward the Bruce-shaped absence the way water curves toward a drain. Someone at the table told the story of the dog. The man who told my father didn't specify who told it first. The man said, someone at the table told it. Someone who had been in that restaurant. The man didn't say who. The man either didn't remember or didn't think the name was his to share, and the name stayed at that dinner table, and the name hasn't traveled, and the name is gone. Someone who had been in that restaurant. Not at Bruce's table. Not eating with Bruce. Someone who had been in the same restaurant on the same night and had seen Bruce stand up and had seen Bruce put money on the table and had seen Bruce walk to the door and had seen, through the window, what happened on the street. A witness. Not a participant. A witness. The witness told the story at the dinner. The man at the dinner heard it. The man told my father. My father told me. 4 hands. Witness dinner guessed my father me. 4 hands is short. I've told you this before. 4 hands keeps the grain. 4 hands carries specific details: the chewing, the money, the forearms, the dog's nose on Bruce's fingers, the ears coming up. 4 hands carries the things that don't survive long chains. 5 hands would lose the chewing. 6 hands would lose the forearms. 7 hands would lose the ears coming up. By 10 hands the story is, Bruce Lee once saved a dog. That's it. That's the 10-hand version. All the texture is gone. All the grain is gone. The chewing is gone. The money is gone. The crouching on wet pavement is gone. The nose touching the fingers is gone. The one lick on the wrist is gone. 4 hands kept the lick. 4 hands kept the detail of the dog's tongue on Bruce's wrist, quick, tentative, the way a dog tests a surface before committing. That detail survived 4 hands. That detail traveled from a restaurant in Kowloon through a dinner table through my father's workshop through my father's mouth into my ears, and I am putting it here, in this chain, which is a different kind of chain, a chain made of recording and editing and upload and algorithm and screen, and this chain will carry the lick further than the 4 hands could. But this chain will also lose something. This chain always loses something. Every chain loses something. The question is what? The 4-hand chain lost the name of the witness. Lost the exact date. Lost what Bruce was eating. Lost what Bruce was drinking. Lost the name of the restaurant. Lost the name of the street. Lost the word Bruce said to the stocky man. Lost the number of kicks. Lost whether the dog was male or female. Lost the breed, if there was a breed, if the dog was anything other than the kind of dog you see on streets in that part of the world, mixed, thin, belonging to no one. The 4-hand chain kept the chewing. Kept the money. Kept the forearms. Kept the crouch. Kept the hand extended, palm down. Kept the nose. Kept the lick. Kept the ears coming up. The chain kept what mattered. Chains do that. Chains are not random. Chains don't lose details by accident. Chains lose the details that the teller's body doesn't hold, the details that the teller heard but didn't feel, the details that the teller's memory filed under information rather than experience. And chains keep the details that the teller's body does hold, the details that landed in the teller's chest or throat or hands. The details that the teller felt when they heard them, the details that became physical when they entered the teller's body through the ears. The chewing was physical. The witness felt the chewing not in the witness's mouth but in the witness's chest, the recognition of it, the strangeness of it, a man walking out of a restaurant with food still in his mouth. That strangeness landed in the witness's body and the witness's body kept it and the witness's mouth passed it to the dinner table and the dinner table passed it to the man and the man passed it to my father and my father's body kept it too. My father kept the chewing because my father understood the chewing. My father understood what it means when a man doesn't finish his food before he acts. My father was a man who finished things. My father finished his meals. My father finished his coffee. My father finished the screw he was sorting before he picked up the next one. My father was sequential. One thing, then the next. Finish, then start. Bruce was not sequential. Bruce was parallel. Bruce chewed and walked and crossed a street and confronted a man and the chewing was still happening. The food was still in his mouth when he reached the other side. The food was still being processed when Bruce's eyes locked onto the stocky man's eyes. The food was still there. My father found this extraordinary. Not the crossing. Not the confrontation. The chewing. The fact that Bruce's body could run 2 operations at once, the operation of eating and the operation of intervening, and neither operation interrupted the other. He was still chewing, my father said. He said it the way you say something that you have thought about for a long time and the thinking has not resolved the strangeness. He was still chewing when he got to the guy. Bruce's forearms were a language. I don't mean this as a metaphor. I don't mean this the way people mean it when they say his body language was intimidating or he spoke with his fists. I mean that Bruce Lee's forearms communicated specific information to anyone who looked at them, the way a sentence communicates specific information to anyone who reads it. The forearms said things. The forearms said, "This body has been used. This body has hit objects harder than your face, repeatedly, for years, and the hitting has left marks, not scars, not bruises, but structural marks, architectural marks, the marks that show up in the shape of a muscle and the path of a vein and the density of a tendon. The forearms were the most visible part of Bruce Lee's body. Not the chest, which was covered by a shirt. Not the legs, which were covered by trousers. The forearms. From the elbow to the wrist. Exposed. Available for reading. And people read them. Every person who ever stood close to Bruce Lee read the forearms. This is in the accounts, not one account, many accounts, the way the same detail appears in multiple witnesses when the detail is real. Jesse Glover talked about the forearms. Taiki Kimura talked about the forearms. Dan Inosanto talked about the forearms. Bob Baker talked about the forearms after Bruce hit him so hard during the filming of a scene that Baker's chest hurt for days. The forearms come up in every account because the forearms were the part of Bruce that you could see without him doing anything. Bruce could be standing still, hands at his sides, completely relaxed, and the forearms were still communicating. They communicated to the stocky man on the street in Kowloon. The stocky man, the dog kicker, the man whose foot had been the instrument of a casual cruelty, the stocky man looked at Bruce and the stocky man's eyes went to the forearms. Not to Bruce's face. Not to Bruce's eyes. The eyes went down into the forearms, because the forearms were at Bruce's sides and Bruce's sides were at the stocky man's eye level or close to it, and the forearms were right there, exposed, and the stocky man's survival instincts did what survival instincts do, they scanned for threat. The forearms were the threat. Not the fists. The fists were open. The fingers were relaxed. The hands were not clenched, not ready, not in any configuration that the stocky man's brain could file under danger. The hands were calm. But the forearms behind the hands, the forearms that powered the hands, the forearms that would turn those open fingers into a fist or a palm strike or a back fist in the time it takes a synapse to fire, the forearms were not calm. The forearms were not anything. The forearms were simply built. The forearms existed in a state of permanent readiness that had nothing to do with intention and everything to do with construction. A loaded gun is dangerous even when no one is holding it. The danger is in the construction, not the intention. Bruce's forearms were loaded. The stocky man saw this. The stocky man's body processed this information faster than the stocky man's mind could name it. The body said, "Those forearms can produce force that you cannot absorb." The body said, "The distance between those forearms and your face is 2.5 feet." The body said, 2.5 feet is not enough distance. The body said, "Leave." The stocky man's mouth closed. The stocky man stepped back. Bruce didn't move. Bruce stood on the wet street with his forearms at his sides and his fingers relaxed and his jaw still working on the last of his food, or maybe the food was gone by now. Maybe the swallowing had happened. Maybe the mouth was empty and Bruce didn't move. The stocky man was retreating and Bruce was letting him retreat. Bruce was not pursuing. Bruce was not closing the distance. Bruce was allowing the distance to grow because the distance growing meant the confrontation was over, and the confrontation being over meant Bruce could do the thing he had come outside to do. Not the confrontation. The dog. Bruce had not come outside to confront two men. Bruce had come outside because a dog was being hurt. The men were in the way. The men were between Bruce and the dog. The confrontation was not the goal. The confrontation was the obstacle. The confrontation was the thing Bruce had to pass through, the way you pass through a door to get to the room on the other side. The door is not the destination. The room is the destination. The door is what's in the way. The men were the door. The dog was the room. And now the door was open. The stocky man was walking away. The taller man was already gone. The street was empty except for Bruce and the dog and the wet pavement and the neon. Bruce looked down. Bruce's body changed. This is the part one keep coming back to. This is the part the chain carried with the most texture, with the most grain, with the most weight. Bruce's body changed. The body that had crossed the street fast, straight, no wasted motion, the body that had stopped 4 feet from the stocky man and stood with its forearms visible and its presence occupying more space than its dimensions, that body changed. The shoulders dropped. Not slumped. Dropped. The way tension leaves a body when the thing causing the tension leaves the room. The stocky man left and Bruce's shoulders dropped, and the dropping was instantaneous, not a gradual relaxation but a release, a letting go, the body shedding something it no longer needed. The hands changed. The fingers, which had been loose but available, the fingers of a man who was not making a fist but could make a fist, the fingers softened. The availability left them. The fingers became just fingers. Digits attached to a palm, attached to a wrist. Not weapons. Not tools. Fingers. The weight shifted. Bruce's weight had been centered, balanced between both feet, distributed evenly, the weight distribution of a man who can move in any direction without preparation. Now the weight moved forward. Onto the balls of the feet. And then down. Bruce bent his knees. Bruce lowered himself. Bruce crouched. The body that crouched was not the body that had crossed the street. The body that crossed the street was a weapon. The body that crouched was something else. The body that crouched was a man who had once been a child in Hong Kong, a child who had seen dogs on streets, stray dogs, thin dogs, dogs that belonged to no one and were kicked by anyone and were fed by almost no one. The body that crouched remembered those dogs. The body that crouched was not processing data. The body that crouched was not calculating odds. The body that crouched was not displaying forearms for communicating threat or occupying space. The body that crouched was making itself small. Bruce Lee made himself small. On a wet street in Kowloon, next to a shaking dog, Bruce Lee made himself small. He lowered his center of gravity. He bent his knees until his knees were near the pavement. He brought his head down until his head was at the level of the dog's head. He made his body, the body that could drop a man twice his size, the body that could deliver a kick that moved a 300-pound bag, the body that was an engine of controlled violence, he made that body the size of a dog. Because the dog could not come up to him. The dog was on the ground. The dog was pressed flat. The dog was as low as a dog could get without being underground. And Bruce understood, the way Bruce understood bodies, the way Bruce understood the physics of living things, Bruce understood that the dog could not rise. The dog's body would not allow it. The dog's body had been kicked to the ground, and the ground was where the dog was staying, and if Bruce wanted to meet the dog, Bruce had to go to the ground. So Bruce went to the ground. And he put his hand out. Palm down. Fingers together. And he waited. The hand. Bruce Lee's right hand. Extended. Palm facing the wet pavement. Fingers together, not spread, not gripping, not curled. The hand was 6 inches from the dog's nose. 6 inches. The distance of a paperback book laid end to end. The distance of 2 fists side by side. A small distance. A distance that Bruce could have closed with a movement so slight that the word movement overstates it, a tilt, a lean, a shift of weight, and the hand would be on the dog's head. Bruce didn't close the distance. Bruce left the distance. The 6 inches belonged to the dog. The 6 inches were the dog's territory, the space between the dog's nose and the hand, and Bruce did not enter the dog's territory because Bruce understood territory. Bruce understood that every living thing has a perimeter, and the perimeter is the line between safe and not safe, and you do not cross the perimeter without invitation. You wait for the perimeter to open. You wait for the living thing to decide that you are safe and to redraw the perimeter to include you. Bruce waited. On a wet street. On his haunches. With the neon sliding pink and green across the puddles and the sound of Kowloon behind him and the restaurant window blowing warm and yellow to his left and his hand out and the dog's nose 6 inches from his fingers. The dog's nose moved. Not toward the hand. Sideways. The nose went left, then right, then left again. The nose was reading the air around the hand. The nose was collecting data, smell data, chemical data, the information that a dog's nose extracts from the air the way a human eye extracts information from light. The nose was determining who this person was and what this person had done recently and what this person had eaten and whether this person's body chemistry contained the markers of anger or fear or calm. Bruce's body chemistry contained calm. I don't know this. I can't know this. But I believe it because of what happened next. The dog's nose stopped moving sideways and started moving forward. Toward the hand. 1 inch. Then a stop. Then another inch. Then a stop. The dog's nose crossed 6 inches in approximately 10 seconds, 10 seconds of starts and stops, 10 seconds of advance and reassessment, 10 seconds during which Bruce did not move. 10 seconds is a long time for Bruce Lee. 10 seconds is the time it takes Bruce Lee to throw 20 punches. 10 seconds is the time it takes Bruce Lee to close a distance and finish a fight and step back and breathe. 10 seconds is an ocean of time in the economy of Bruce Lee's body. And Bruce spent 10 seconds not moving. The nose touched the fingers. The contact was light. The wet leather of a dog's nose against the dry skin of a man's fingertip. The dog's nose pressed, not hard, not a push, just the pressure of contact, the weight of a nose resting against a surface. The nose sat there. On Bruce's fingertip. For a moment that the chain doesn't measure 1 second. 2, 5, the nose sat. Bruce's fingers didn't move. Then the dog's nose moved again. Forward. Past the fingertips. Along the fingers. Over the knuckles. Into the palm. The nose traveled the length of Bruce's hand the way a reader's eyes travel the length of a sentence, 1 word at a time, each word considered, each word processed before the next one is reached. The dog read Bruce's hand. The dog's nose moved over the palm and the palm was open and the palm was warm, a living palm, a palm with blood moving through it, a palm with a pulse, and the dog's nose stopped in the center of the palm and stayed. The lick. The dog's tongue came out. Fast, the quick dart of a dog's tongue, the pink flash that appears and disappears, and the tongue touched Bruce's wrist. 1 lick. Above the palm. On the inside of the wrist. On the place where Bruce's pulse was, where the veins were closest to the surface, where the skin was thin enough that the dog's tongue could feel the blood moving underneath. The dog licked Bruce Lee's pulse. I don't know if the dog knew what a pulse was. I don't know if the dog could feel the heartbeat through the tongue. But the dog's tongue landed on the exact spot where the heartbeat was closest to the surface, and the dog licked that spot once and withdrew, and the lick was the perimeter opening. The lick was the dog redrawing the line. The lick was the dog saying, "You are inside now. You have crossed from not safe to safe." Bruce's fingers moved. Slowly. After the lick, after the permission, after the redrawing of the line. The fingers curled, not closed, not a fist, just curled, and the fingertips rose from the level of the dog's nose to the level of the dog's head, and the fingertips touched the top of the skull. Between the ears. Light. The pressure of a thought. The pressure of something so slight that the dog could have shaken it off with a twitch and the hand would have retreated. The dog didn't shake. The dog's ears moved. Up. Not all the way up. Not the full alert of a healthy dog. But up off the skull. Up from flat. The ears rose the way a drawbridge rises, slowly, mechanically, 1 degree at a time, and the rising was the sound of a dog's body deciding that the world had changed. The world had contained a foot. Now the world contained a hand. The foot had caused the ears to go down. The hand was causing the ears to come up. Bruce's fingertips stayed on the dog's head. Between the ears. Resting. The fingers moved a tiny motion, a circular motion, the motion of fingertips rubbing the thin fur between a dog's ears, and the dog's eyes closed. Not sleep. Not unconsciousness. The closing of eyes that comes when the body has been in pain and the pain has stopped, and the absence of pain is so overwhelming that the eyes cannot stay open because the eyes have been open for the pain, and now the pain is gone and the eyes can close. The closing that comes after. The closing that is the body's way of saying, it is over. I can stop watching now. I can stop scanning for the next kick. I can stop. The dog's eyes closed and Bruce's fingers moved in slow circles between the dog's ears, and the neon reflected in the puddles, and the street went on around them, a bicycle passing, a woman carrying a bag, the distant clatter of a kitchen, and none of it mattered. None of it touched the two bodies on the wet pavement. A man crouched in a dog with its eyes closed and the small, slow circles of fingertips on fur. Bruce picked the dog up. Not immediately. Not after the eyes closed. There was more time, the chain doesn't say how much, minutes probably, enough time for the dog's body to stop trembling, enough time for the dog's breathing to slow, enough time for the flat-eared terror to become something closer to rest. Bruce waited for all of that. Bruce waited for the trembling to stop and the breathing to slow and the ears to stay up and the eyes to stay closed. Then Bruce's hands moved. One hand under the dog's chest. One hand under the dog's hindquarters. The hands came together and the dog's body was between them, and Bruce stood. Bruce stood the way Bruce always stood, fast, complete. The transition from crouching to standing compressed into a single motion, but this time the motion was different because this time Bruce's hands were full. Bruce's hands were holding a dog. And the dog was not light, the dog was thin, the dog was starved, but the dog was still a dog, and the dog had bones and the bones had weight, and Bruce held the dog against his chest and the dog's head was near Bruce's shoulder and the dog's eyes were still closed. Bruce walked. Bruce walked across the wet street with the dog in his arms. He walked back toward the restaurant. He walked past the restaurant, past the window, past the warm light, past the table where his plate sat half finished and the bills sat in a stack. He walked past all of it. He didn't go back inside. Bruce walked down the street carrying a dog. Where he walked, the chain doesn't say. Where he took the dog, the chain doesn't specify. The witness in the restaurant, the person who later told this story at a dinner after Bruce died, the witness saw Bruce walk past the window with the dog in his arms, and the witness saw Bruce continue down the street, and the witness saw Bruce turn a corner, and the witness did not see Bruce again that night. Bruce Lee walked around a corner in Kowloon carrying a stray dog and disappeared. Bruce Lee grew up with dogs. Not his dogs. Nobody's dogs. The dogs of Kowloon, the strays that lived between the market stalls and the gutters and the back doors of restaurants where the kitchen boys threw scraps. Those dogs. The dogs that belonged to the streets the way the pavement belonged to the streets, not owned, just there. Present. Part of the surface of the city. Bruce walked past those dogs every day. As a boy. As a teenager. As the young man who danced cha-cha and got into street fights and trained with Ip Man in a room on the second floor of a building where the stairwell smelled like cooking oil and the walls were thin enough to hear the family next door arguing. Bruce walked past dogs on his way to that building. Bruce walked past dogs on his way back. The dogs were in the alleys and on the curbs and under the market tables and in the doorways, and Bruce's feet, the same feet that would later move in ways that cameras could not capture, Bruce's feet stepped around those dogs. He noticed them. I say this because the chain carries evidence that Bruce noticed dogs. Not as a special interest. Not as a cause. Bruce noticed dogs the way Bruce noticed everything, the way Bruce noticed the distance between two bodies, the way Bruce noticed the weight distribution of a man standing in a doorway, the way Bruce noticed which foot was forward and which foot was back and what that meant about what the man could do next. Bruce's eyes collected data. Bruce's eyes collected data from everything: people, objects, rooms, streets, animals. The dogs were data. The dogs were bodies in space. The dogs had posture and movement and behavior, and Bruce's eyes read all of it the way Bruce's eyes read everything. A boy in Kowloon. Walking to training. Stepping around a dog in a doorway. The dog is asleep or pretending to sleep, the half-sleep of a stray, the sleep where one ear stays up, and the boy steps around the dog without breaking stride. The boy's feet adjust. The boy's path curves. The curve is 2 inches, just enough to clear the dog's tail, and the boy doesn't look down. The boy's feet know where the dog is. The boy's feet have mapped the dog without the boy's eyes confirming the map. This is Bruce at 12. Maybe 13. Walking through Kowloon with the data pouring in every body, every posture, every movement, and the feet adjusting, always adjusting. The feet finding the path through the crowd and the carts and the dogs and the bicycles, and the body moving through the city the way water moves through a channel, around, between, through. Bruce at 15. Coming out of Ip Man's school. Coming down the narrow stairs with the cooking oil smell. Stepping into the alley. A dog is there, different dog, same alley, different day, and the dog lifts its head and Bruce stops. Not for long. A second. 2 seconds. Bruce looks at the dog and the dog looks at Bruce, and whatever passes between them passes quickly and Bruce walks on. Bruce at 17. The street fights have started. Bruce is fighting on rooftops and in alleys and in the spaces between buildings where the walls are close enough to touch both sides at once. Bruce is fast and getting faster. Bruce is learning what his body can do, and the learning is accelerating. Bruce comes home from a fight, knuckles raw, maybe, or a bruise forming on his forearm, and Bruce walks through Kowloon and there are dogs in the alleys, and the dogs are the same dogs or different dogs that look the same, and Bruce walks past them. But here's the thing. Bruce never kicked a dog. I say this not because anyone ever claimed Bruce kicked a dog. No one did. No one would. The idea is absurd. I say it because the negative is important. The negative is the frame. Bruce grew up in a city where stray dogs were kicked. Stray dogs were kicked by market vendors who wanted them away from the stalls. Stray dogs were kicked by men who were drunk or angry or bored or all three. Stray dogs were kicked because stray dogs were there, and the kicking was free and no one stopped you. Bruce saw this. Bruce saw men kick dogs. Bruce saw the foot and the arc and the contact and the sound. Bruce saw this as a boy and Bruce filed it somewhere in the place where the data went, in the place where Bruce's body stored information about what people do to things that are smaller and weaker and have no voice and no recourse. And when Bruce walked out of a restaurant in Kowloon, 20 years later, and heard that sound through the glass, the sound of a dog being kicked, the sound that came from the place below sound, Bruce's body didn't need to process the data. The data was already processed. The data had been processed 20 years ago, on a street like this one, in front of a market stall or in an alley or in a doorway, and the processing had produced a conclusion and the conclusion was stored and the conclusion was ready. The conclusion was, cross the street. The conclusion was, this stops now. I need to talk about what Bruce was carrying when he crossed that street. Not physical weight. Not the dog came later. I need to talk about the weight that Bruce carried inside his body, the weight that every person who trains for years carries, the weight of capacity. The weight of knowing what you can do. Bruce Lee at that point in his life, mid-60s, Kowloon, sometime before Hollywood understood what it had in him, Bruce Lee could do things that most human beings could not do. Bruce could strike with a force that exceeded his body weight. Bruce could move his hands faster than a camera set to 24 frames per second could record. Bruce could read a body's intention before the body began to move. Bruce could, and this is the part that matters for the street, for the stocky man, for the confrontation, Bruce could end a fight before the other person knew the fight had started. Bruce carried this capacity the way a loaded truck carries its cargo, always, in all conditions, whether the cargo is needed or not. The truck doesn't unload when it parks. The truck is loaded at rest and loaded in motion and loaded at dinner and loaded on a wet street at night in Kowloon. The cargo is there. The capacity is there. Bruce crossed the street carrying the capacity to destroy the stocky man. I use that word deliberately. Destroy. Not defeat. Not overpower. Not subdue. Destroy. Bruce Lee could have crossed that street, and in the time it took the stocky man to register Bruce's presence, that half-second gap between seeing and understanding, Bruce could have closed the distance and delivered a strike that would have broken the man's jaw or cracked his ribs or dropped him to the pavement in the same posture as the dog. Bruce could have done this. The forearms could have done this. The fists could have done this. The feet, the silent feet, the feet with the private arrangement, the feet could have closed the distance and delivered a kick that the stocky man would have carried in his body for weeks. Bruce didn't do any of it. Bruce crossed the street and stopped. Bruce stood. Bruce looked. Bruce showed the forearms, not displayed them. Not flexed them, not posed, just showed them, the way a building shows its structure, and the forearms communicated and the man received the communication and the man left. No contact. No strike. No kick. No block. No grab. No throw. No joint lock. No sweep. Nothing from the catalog of techniques that Bruce had spent his life building. Nothing from the wooden dummy. Nothing from the hours of cheese saw. Nothing from the sparring or the heavy bag work or the speed bag work or the isometric exercises or the running or the stretching. None of it. Zero. Bruce used none of it. Bruce used presence. Bruce used proximity. Bruce used 2.5 feet and 2 forearms and 1 word and the man left. This is the weight I'm talking about. The weight of carrying all of that, all of the training, all of the capacity, all of the things the body can do, and choosing not to use it. The weight of restraint. The weight of a loaded weapon that stays holstered. The weight of a man who could cross 15 feet of wet pavement and end a human being's evening in 7 seconds and instead crosses 15 feet of wet pavement and stands there with his hands open.
The hands open. I keep coming back to the hands.
The hands were open when Bruce crossed the street. The hands were open when Bruce stopped 4 feet from the stocky man. The hands were open when the distance closed to 2.5 feet. The hands were open when Bruce spoke his one word. The hands were open when the stocky man walked away. The hands were open when Bruce looked down at the dog. The hands were open when Bruce crouched. The hands were open when Bruce extended his right hand toward the dog's nose.
The same hands.
The same hands that could close into fists that moved at speeds the eye couldn't track. The same hands that could deliver a 1-inch punch that sent a grown man stumbling backward. The same hands that hit Bob Baker so hard during a film shoot that Baker's chest ached for days.
Those hands.
Those hands were open. Those hands were extended toward a dog's nose with the fingers together and the palm down and the offer clear. Here, if you want.
The weight of the fist is in the opening. The power of the punch is in the choosing not to punch. I think Bruce understood this. I think Bruce understood that the most dangerous thing about a man who can destroy you is not the destruction, it's the restraint. It's the space between the capacity and the act. It's the 2.5 feet and the open hands and the one word spoken quietly on a wet street. It's the gap. The gap is where the power lives. The gap is where the man lives. Not in the strike. In the choosing not to strike. Bruce crouched on the wet pavement with all of that weight inside him, the weight of everything he could do, and he put his hand out toward a dog that weighed maybe 30 pounds and was shaking so hard its teeth were clicking. He put his hand out gently. He put his hand out the way you put a glass down on a table, with attention to the surface, with awareness of the contact, with the understanding that the thing you are touching is more fragile than the force you carry. The dog's nose touched his fingers. 30 pounds of dog met all of Bruce Lee's capacity through the surface of 2 fingertips. The fingertips were gentle. The witness saw Bruce walk away with the dog. Past the restaurant window. Down the street. Around a corner. Gone. The chain doesn't carry what happened after the corner. The chain doesn't say where Bruce took the dog. The chain doesn't say whether Bruce brought the dog home or brought the dog to a friend or brought the dog to a vet, if there were vets in that part of Kowloon who would see a stray at night, which there probably weren't. The chain doesn't say whether the dog survived the night. The chain doesn't say whether the ribs that were visible became ribs that were covered. The chain doesn't say anything about after. After is a hole. The story has a beginning, the foot, the kick, the sound through the glass. The story has a middle, the crossing, the stop, the forearms, the crouch, the hand, the nose, the lick, the ears coming up. And the story has an ending, Bruce walking away with the dog in his arms. Turning a corner, disappearing. But the ending is not a resolution. The ending is a corner. The ending is the place where Bruce went out of sight and the story stopped being observed and the story stopped being a story and became whatever happened next, which nobody saw, which nobody reported, which nobody carried. The witness didn't follow Bruce around the corner. The witness stayed at the table. The witness finished dinner. The witness went home. The witness carried the story inside the crossing, the crouching, the hand, and the witness didn't tell the story until after Bruce died. Until a dinner. Until a table full of people who had known Bruce and were passing stories around the way you pass dishes, each person adding something, each person taking something, the meal of memory that people eat when someone is gone. The witness told the story. Someone at the dinner carried it to another dinner. At that dinner, the man who told my father was present. The man carried it home. The man told my father. My father carried it for years. My father carried the story of the dog the way my father carried all the stories, in a pocket, the way you carry a coin you don't spend. Not on display.
Not in conversation. Not at parties or gatherings or the dinner table.
In a pocket. Quiet. Heavy. There. My father told me this story twice. Once in his workshop, sorting screws. Once in the kitchen, late, the kind of late where the house is asleep and the kitchen light is the only light and the coffee is cold because nobody reheated it and the talking has been going on for long enough that the coffee doesn't matter anymore.
The second time was shorter. The second time my father skipped the forearms.
Skipped the money on the table. Went straight to the crossing and the crouching and the hand and the dog's ears coming up. The ears came up, my father said. He was holding his coffee cup but not drinking. That was the thing. The ears came up. My father put the cup down. He looked at the table. He was quiet for a while, the kind of quiet my father did, which was not uncomfortable, which was not waiting, which was just quiet, the quiet of a man who has finished a sentence and is sitting inside the silence that follows the sentence. He could have killed that guy, my father said. You know that, right? He could have killed him. And instead he got down on the ground and put his hand out for a dog. My father picked up his cup again. Drank. Cold coffee. He didn't react to the temperature. That's the thing about Bruce, my father said. Everybody talks about the hands. What the hands could do. How fast. How hard. Nobody talks about what the hands didn't do. Nobody talks about the hands being open. My father's workshop was in the garage. Not a converted garage, not the kind with drywall and recessed lighting and a thermostat. A garage. Concrete floor. One window. A bulb hanging from a cord. Shelving units along the walls, metal shelving, the kind you buy unassembled and put together with bolts and a wrench, and my father had put them together and the putting together was tight, precise, the bolts torqued evenly, the shelves level, because my father was a man who did not tolerate a shelf that wasn't level. On the shelves, jars. Mason jars and coffee cans and peanut butter jars washed clean with the labels peeled off. Inside the jars, screws. Nails. Bolts. Washers. Wing nuts. Cotter pins. Fuses. Wire connectors. The entire taxonomy of small metal objects that a man accumulates over a lifetime of fixing things. Every jar labeled. Every label in my father's handwriting, small, square, the handwriting of a man who learned to write in a country where handwriting mattered and brought the mattering to another country where nobody cared. This was where my father told me the story of the dog the first time. I was in the workshop because I was always in the workshop. Not helping, I wasn't useful in the workshop. I was too young to be useful and later I was too uninterested and later still I was too absent. I was in the workshop the way a cat is in a room, present, peripheral, occupying space without contributing to the project. I sat on a stool near the door. My father stood at the workbench. Between us, the distance of a father and a son who love each other and do not know how to say so and have settled on proximity as a substitute for the saying. My father was sorting screws. He sorted screws the way he did everything, with his hands, without looking, the fingers finding the shape and the size and the thread count by touch. The fingers knew. The fingers had been doing this for years. The fingers could tell you the difference between a number 6 and a number 8 without the eyes confirming. The fingers dropped the screw into the correct jar and the screw made a sound, a small metal sound,
a click, or a tink depending on what was already in the jar, and the fingers reached for the next one.
My father was sorting screws and talking about Bruce Lee. I don't remember how we got there. I don't remember what started it.
Something, a movie on television, a magazine, a conversation earlier that day, something had brought Bruce Lee into the air between us, and my father had caught it. My father had caught the name the way his fingers caught screws, without looking, by feel, the recognition automatic. I heard a story, my father said. My father always started like that. I heard a story. Not I want to tell you something. Not let me tell you about Bruce Lee. I heard a story. The phrasing mattered. The phrasing established the chain. The phrasing said, this did not originate with me. This came from somewhere. This passed through hands before it reached my hands, and now it is passing through my hands to yours. I heard a story. My father told me about the dog. He told me about the restaurant and the sound through the glass and the money on the table, all of it, whatever was in his pocket, and the door opening and the crossing and the stopping and the forearms and the man backing away and the crouching and the hand and the nose and the lick and the ears coming up. My father told me all of it. He told me while sorting screws. The screws went into jars and the words went into me, and neither process was interrupted by the other. My father was parallel. My father could sort and talk, and the sorting didn't slow the talking, and the talking didn't slow the sorting. The hands worked. The mouth worked. Like Bruce. Like Bruce chewing while crossing the street. I didn't see it then. I see it now. My father's hands moving without looking, sorting small metal objects by feel, the fingers knowing what the eyes hadn't confirmed, that was my father's version of Bruce's body running parallel operations. The hands on one task. The mind on another. Both running. Neither interfering. My father finished the story. The ears came up. Bruce walked away with the dog. Around the corner. Gone. My father dropped a screw into a jar. Tink. Silence. Then my father said, he put all the money on the table. That was the part my father circled back to. Not the dog. Not the forearms. The money. All of it. A man who counts his money wouldn't do that, my father said. A man who knows what's in his pocket. My father picked up another screw. Looked at it. This one he looked at. This one required his eyes. A man who knows what's in his pocket puts the right amount on the table. Maybe a little extra. He doesn't put all of it. My father dropped the screw. Wrong jar. He fished it out. Put it in the right jar. Tink. Bruce put all of it, my father said. Because Bruce wasn't counting. Bruce was already out the door. Bruce was already across the street. The money was. My father paused. The kind of pause that means the next word is being selected from several options. The money was the receipt, my father said. You pay and you leave. But Bruce left and then paid. The leaving was first. The money was just the proof that Bruce had already left. My father looked at me. Not at my face, at my position. At the stool near the door. My father looked at me the way a man looks at a thing he is checking on, the way you look at a pot on the stove, not because you think the pot is changed, but because the pot is there and your eyes go to it. You understand? My father said. I didn't. I was young. I said I did because saying I didn't would mean an explanation, and the explanation would be longer than the story, and I was ready for the story to be over because the stool was hard and the garage was cold and I was whatever age I was, and the dog and the money and the forearms were interesting, but the stool was hard.
Yeah, I said. My father knew I didn't understand.
My father looked at me the way he looked at screws sometimes, holding the screw, feeling the thread, and the thread was wrong. The screw was in the wrong pile, and my father looked at me and knew the understanding was in the wrong pile.
But my father didn't correct it. My father put the screw down. My father let the understanding sit where it was. My father knew that some screws get sorted later.
Years later. The second time my father told me this story, I was older. Old enough that the stool in the workshop was a memory and the workshop was a memory, and my father's house was a place I visited rather than a place I lived. Old enough that the kitchen at midnight was not an accident but a ritual, the ritual of fathers and sons who see each other less than they should and make up for the seeing by staying up too late and talking too long over coffee that goes cold.
My father was sitting across from me. The kitchen was small.
The table between us was the table I had eaten every childhood meal on, same table, same chairs, the table that had survived everything that tables survive in families, meals and arguments and homework and bills spread out in Christmas mornings and the long silences that come after someone says something that can't be unsaid. The table had survived all of it. The table was a witness. The coffee was in mugs.
My father's mug was brown with a chip on the rim.
My mother had tried to throw this mug away 3 times, and 3 times my father had retrieved it from the garbage and washed it and put it back in the cabinet. The mug persisted.
The mug was stubbornness in ceramic form. I don't remember what led to the story. Something
about discipline or fighting or control, some word that triggered the chain in my father's memory, and my father's mouth opened and the story came out again. But this time the story was different.
Not different, in fact.
The facts were the same: the restaurant, the sound, the crossing, the dog, the hand. The facts hadn't changed. The facts had been carried faithfully from the first telling to the second. But the shape was different.
The emphasis was different.
The first time, in the workshop, my father had told the whole story, beginning to middle to end, every detail the chain had given him.
The second time, in the kitchen, my father went to the center. He got down on the ground, my father said. He got down on the ground for that dog. My father skipped the restaurant. Skipped the money.
Skipped the crossing and the forearms and the man backing away.
My father went straight to the crouching. Straight to the knees on wet pavement. Straight to the hand extended. Straight to the nose on the fingers. Straight to the ears. The ears came up, my father said. My father was holding his coffee mug. The brown one with the chip.
He was holding it with both hands, the way you hold a mug when you're not drinking, when the mug is a thing to hold rather than a thing to drink from. The warmth was probably gone. The coffee was probably cold.
My father held it anyway.
That was the thing, my father said.
The ears came up.
The dog was flat. The dog was as flat as a dog gets. And Bruce got down on the ground and put his hand out, and the dog's ears came up.
My father drank.
Cold coffee.
No reaction.
He could have killed that guy, my father said.
You know that, right?
He could have killed him. Crossed the street and killed him.
Nobody would have stopped him. Nobody would have. Who's going to stop Bruce Lee? Who's going to step in? Nobody. Nobody steps in.
Bruce crosses the street and does whatever Bruce does, and that man goes to the hospital or the morgue and nobody says a word because everybody saw what that man was doing to the dog and everybody thinks the man deserved it. My father put the mug down. Looked at me. But Bruce didn't kill him. Bruce didn't hit him. Bruce didn't touch him. Bruce stood there with his hands open and that guy walked away and then Bruce. My father stopped. The pause. The same pause from the workshop years earlier. The pause that means the next word is being selected. But this time the pause was longer. This time the pause had weight. This time the pause was a man in a kitchen at midnight choosing his words with the care of a man who has learned that words, once spoken, live in the room forever. Bruce got on the ground, my father said. Bruce got on the ground for a dog. Not a person. Not a child. A dog. A stray. A nothing animal that nobody owned and nobody wanted and nobody would have noticed if it died on that pavement. And Bruce Lee got on the ground and put his hand out. My father looked at the table. At the surface that had held everything our family had ever placed on it. At the wood grain that ran left to right like a river seen from above. That's the part, my father said. That's the part nobody knows. Everybody knows the kick. Everybody knows the punch. Everybody knows the speed and the power and the. My father waved his hand. The gesture was dismissal. The gesture was a man sweeping something off a table. Everybody knows what Bruce Lee could do. Nobody knows what Bruce Lee did. For a dog. On a street. In the middle of the night. On his knees. My father picked up his mug. Drank. Put it down. On his knees, my father repeated. Bruce Lee. On his knees. There's a frequency. I don't mean a sound frequency, not hertz, not wavelength, not the physics of vibration. I mean a human frequency. The frequency at which a person operates. The speed and the rhythm and the pattern of their engagement with the world. Every person has one. Most people's frequency is slow and steady and predictable. They encounter the world at a regular rate. They process the world at a regular rate. They respond at a regular rate. The interval between input and output is long. Something happens. They see it. They think about it. They decide. They act. 4 steps. 4 gaps between steps. The gaps are where the time lives. Bruce Lee's frequency was different. Bruce Lee's frequency had no gaps. Input and output were the same event. The seeing and the acting were not sequential, they were simultaneous. The sound came through the glass and the hand went to the pocket and the money was on the table and the body was in motion and the door was opening and the feet were on the wet pavement and the distance was closing. All of it. All at once. Not 4 steps with 4 gaps. 1 step with no gap. This is what my father was trying to tell me. Both times. In the workshop and in the kitchen. My father was trying to describe the frequency. He was still chewing, my father said in the workshop. He was already across the street, my father said in the kitchen. Both statements are about the frequency. Both statements are about the gap, or rather, the absence of the gap. Bruce was still chewing because the chewing and the crossing were the same event. Bruce was already across the street because the hearing and the crossing were the same event. There was no gap between the sound of the dog and the opening of the door. There was no gap between the opening of the door and the crossing of the street. There was no gap between the crossing of the street and the stopping 4 feet from the stocky man.
No gap. The gap is where most people live. The gap is where hesitation lives. The gap is where the questions live. Should I? Shouldn't I? Is this my business? What if he's bigger than me? What if there are 2 of them? What if they have a weapon? What will happen to me? What will it cost me? The questions live in the gap. The questions are the gap. The questions are the distance between seeing a wrong thing and walking toward it. Bruce had no gap. Bruce heard the dog and Bruce moved. The questions didn't arise because the space where the questions would have lived, the gap between the sound and the movement, that space didn't exist. Bruce's frequency was too fast for the questions. The questions needed time to form, and time was the thing Bruce didn't give them. This is not the same as recklessness. This is not a man charging blindly into danger. This is a man whose processing speed is so fast that the analysis and the action occupy the same moment. Bruce didn't skip the analysis. Bruce completed the analysis in the time it took his hand to reach his pocket. The analysis was, a dog is being hurt. The conclusion was, I go. The gap between the analysis and the conclusion was 0. And the gap between the conclusion and the action was 0. 0 plus 0 equals Bruce Lee on a wet street in Kowloon with his hands open and a man twice his size backing away. But here's the thing about the frequency. Here's the thing I didn't understand in the workshop and I began to understand in the kitchen, and I understand now, years later, writing this. The frequency changed. The frequency that carried Bruce across the street fast, no gap, input and output simultaneous, that frequency changed when the stocky man walked away. That frequency changed when Bruce looked down at the dog. That frequency changed when Bruce crouched. The frequency slowed. Not because Bruce was tired. Not because the adrenaline was fading. The frequency slowed because the situation had changed and the situation required a different frequency. The confrontation required speed. The dog required slowness. The confrontation required the elimination of gaps. The dog required the creation of gaps. The confrontation required Bruce to move so fast that the stocky man's brain couldn't keep up. The dog required Bruce to move so slowly that the dog's body could keep up. Bruce changed frequencies the way a musician changes keys. One moment Bruce was operating at the frequency of a man crossing a street to confront a threat, fast, compressed, no space between intention and action. The next moment Bruce was operating at the frequency of a man lowering himself to the ground to meet a shaking dog, slow, open, all space, the space between the hand and the nose, the space of 6 inches, the space that belonged to the dog. The same body. The same hands. The same Bruce. 2 frequencies. The crossing was prestissimo. All the notes compressed. All the gaps eliminated. A blur of sound. The crouching was adagio. The notes stretched. The gaps expanded. Each note held until the note was finished, until the sound had been fully received, until the air had absorbed it. The hand extended at adagio. The fingers uncurled at adagio. The 6 inches of air between the hand and the dog's nose, those 6 inches were filled with adagio. Those 6 inches took 10 seconds to cross because 10 seconds was the tempo the dog needed. 10 seconds was the rhythm at which the dog's body could process new information without triggering the fear response. Bruce matched the dog's tempo. Bruce Lee, the fastest human being most people had ever seen, matched the tempo of a shaking stray dog on a wet pavement. Bruce slowed himself to the speed of an animal that had been kicked.
Bruce compressed his frequency for a man who kicked dogs and expanded his frequency for the dog that was kicked. That's the story. That's the whole story. Not the crossing. Not the forearms. Not the money or the confrontation or the one word spoken on a wet street. The story is the frequency change. The story is the shift. The story is a body that could operate at a speed the human eye couldn't track, choosing to operate at a speed a terrified dog could follow. The story is Bruce Lee slowing down. The dog knew things. Not facts. Not names. Not the identity of the man crouching in front of it. The dog didn't know it was Bruce Lee. The dog didn't know what Bruce Lee meant. The dog didn't know about Wing Chun or Jeet Kune Do or the 1-inch punch or the Long Beach tournament or the screen test for number 1 son. The dog didn't know any of it. The dog was a dog on a street in Kowloon, and the dog's knowledge was dog knowledge, the knowledge of surfaces and temperatures and pressures and smells. The knowledge of what hurts and what doesn't. The dog knew the foot. The dog knew the foot the way you know a word you've heard 1,000 times. The foot was vocabulary. The foot was part of the language the world spoke to the dog, and the language was simple and the grammar was consistent. Feet kick. Feet approach and feet kick, and the kicking produces pain, and the pain is located in the ribs or the belly or the hip or the shoulder or the head. The dog knew this grammar. The dog had learned this grammar on the streets of Kowloon over however many months or years the dog had been alive. The grammar was reliable. The grammar did not have exceptions. Then the hand. The hand was a different word. The hand was a word the dog recognized but did not trust, because hands were not consistent. Hands were not like feet. Feet had one grammar. They kicked. Hands had multiple grammars. Hands fed. Hands struck. Hands threw objects. Hands opened doors. Hands closed doors. Hands picked up sticks. Hands picked up stones. Hands reached toward you with food, and hands reached toward you with pain, and the reaching looked the same. The approach of a feeding hand and the approach of a striking hand, the visual information was identical. The dog's eyes could not tell the difference. The dog's eyes saw a hand approaching, and the dog's eyes did not know which grammar the hand was using. The nose knew. The nose was where the truth lived. The eyes lied. The eyes said, "This hand looks like every other hand," but the nose told the truth. The nose read the chemistry. The nose detected the cortisol and the adrenaline and the testosterone and the alcohol and the whatever it was that human bodies produced when the bodies intended harm. The nose could read intention the way a human reads a sign. The sign says open or closed, and you don't need to try the door. The nose says safe or not safe, and the dog doesn't need to wait for the hand to land. The dog's nose read Bruce's hand. The dog's nose 6 inches from Bruce's fingers, then 5, then 4, then 3. The dog's nose was reading the air around the hand. Sampling it. Pulling molecules across the olfactory membrane and converting those molecules into information, and the information was no cortisol spike. No adrenaline flood. No alcohol. No aggression markers. No fear. The hand was calm. Not performing calm, not the forced steadiness of a person trying to appear calm while the chemistry underneath tells a different story. The hand was actually calm. The chemistry matched the posture. The inside matched the outside. The hand said safe, and the air around the hand said safe, and the nose confirmed what the eyes could not determine. Safe. The dog's nose touched Bruce's fingers because the nose had determined that the fingers were safe.
Not because the dog decided to be brave. Not because the dog overcame its fear through some act of canine will. The dog's nose touched Bruce's fingers because the nose did its job and the job produced a result, and the result was approach. This is what the dog knew. The dog knew chemistry. The dog knew that the man crouching in front of it was producing the chemicals of calm. The dog knew that the man's hand was warm and steady and the air around the hand was clean of threat, clean of the markers that meant pain was coming. The dog knew these things through the nose, and the nose was the most reliable instrument the dog possessed, and the nose said, "This hand will not hurt you." The dog trusted the nose. The one lick on Bruce's wrist, the lick was the dog's body acting on the nose's information. The nose said safe and the tongue came out and the tongue touched the wrist and the wrist was warm and the pulse was there, under the skin, steady, and the tongue felt the pulse and the pulse was slow. Not racing. Not the hammering pulse of a man who has just crossed a street to confront someone. The pulse was slow because Bruce's heart rate was slow because Bruce had changed frequencies. Bruce had gone from prestissimo to adagio and the heart had followed and the pulse had followed and the dog's tongue had found the evidence of the slowing on the inside of Bruce's wrist. The dog's tongue found Bruce Lee's heart rate and the heart rate was the heart rate of a man who was not going to hurt anyone. The ears came up. The ears came up because the ears are controlled by muscles and the muscles are controlled by the nervous system, and the nervous system had received the data from the nose, from the tongue, from the skin of the dog's head where Bruce's fingertips rested, and the data was consistent and the data said safe and the nervous system relaxed the muscles that held the ears flat and the ears rose. The ears were the receipt. The ears were the proof that the transaction had been completed. Bruce had offered his hand. The dog had assessed the hand. The hand had passed the assessment. The ears came up. Transaction complete. Trust established. Perimeter redrawn. The dog knew none of this in words. The dog knew none of this in concepts. The dog knew it in the body, in the nose and the tongue and the ears and the muscles and the nerves and the chemistry. The dog's body did the knowing. The dog's body processed Bruce's body, and the processing was pure, uncorrupted by reputation, uncorrupted by fame, uncorrupted by the knowledge that this man could kick through a board or drop a man with a single strike. The dog's body didn't know any of that. The dog's body only knew what the dog's body could detect: the smell of the hand, the warmth of the palm, the steadiness of the pulse, the pressure of the fingertips. The dog knew Bruce Lee the way Bruce Lee deserved to be known. Not as a fighter. Not as a star. Not as a legend or a myth or a brand or a cultural phenomenon. The dog knew Bruce Lee as a hand. An open hand. A warm palm. A steady pulse. A set of fingertips moving in slow circles between the ears. The dog knew Bruce Lee as safe. Bruce walked around a corner carrying a dog and the witness lost sight of him and the story ended. But stories don't end at corners. Corners are not endings. Corners are the places where the observer's line of sight terminates and the story continues without observation. The story goes on around the corner. The story keeps happening. The story doesn't need the observer. Bruce went around the corner. What was around the corner? The chain doesn't say. Kowloon had 1,000,000 corners and each corner opened onto another street or another alley or another world. Around the corner there might have been another row of shops with their metal shutters down. There might have been a noodle cart with steam rising from the broth. There might have been a man sleeping in a doorway. There might have been a bicycle chained to a post. There might have been nothing, just pavement and darkness and the distant sound of a city that never entirely sleeps. Bruce walked into that. Carrying a dog. With empty pockets. I think about the empty pockets. I've been thinking about the empty pockets since my father first mentioned the money.
Bruce Lee walking through Kowloon at night with a dog in his arms and nothing in his pockets.
No money. No buffer.
Just a man and a dog and whatever was between where Bruce was and where Bruce was going.
Where was Bruce going? The chain doesn't say.
But the chain doesn't need to say, because the destination doesn't matter.
What matters is the walking.
What matters is the image, the picture that the chain has carried across 4 hands and decades and an ocean and into my father's workshop and my father's kitchen and now into this recording. The picture of Bruce Lee walking through the night with a dog pressed against his chest. The dog's head near Bruce's shoulder. The dog's eyes closed. Bruce's arms underneath the dog, one arm under the chest, one arm under the hindquarters, and the arms holding the weight of the dog the way arms hold weight, which is to say completely, which is to say without negotiation, which is to say the arms have accepted the weight and the weight is theirs now and the arms will carry it. Bruce's shirt was wet. The dog was wet. The pavement was wet. Everything was wet, the night was wet, the air was wet. Kowloon was a city that sweated even in the dark, and Bruce walked through the wet with a wet dog against his wet shirt, and the wetness didn't matter. The wetness was data that Bruce's body processed and filed under irrelevant.
The temperature of the water. The sensation of wet fabric against skin.
The weight of a dog made heavier by wet fur.
All irrelevant. All filed. All dismissed.
Bruce's body was carrying a dog and the carrying was the only operation that mattered and the body gave the operation its full resources.
Around the corner. Down a street. Through the dark. I imagine Bruce's footsteps. Silent.
The feet that had a private arrangement with every surface.
The feet that didn't make sound.
Bruce walked through Kowloon at night and the city heard traffic and voices and kitchen sounds and bicycle bells and distant music and the city did not hear Bruce's feet. Bruce's feet moved across the pavement the way a thought moves across a mind, present, directional, weightless. The dog in Bruce's arms probably heard the heartbeat.
Dogs hear heartbeats.
Dogs press their heads against your chest and the ear that faces your body picks up the rhythm, the thump and rest, the metronome that runs underneath everything a body does.
The dog's ear was against Bruce's chest and the dog's ear was hearing Bruce's heartbeat. What tempo was the heart?
Adagio.
Still adagio.
Still the slow tempo, the expanded notes, the rhythm of a man who has finished the fast thing and is now in the slow thing. The heart was beating for the dog. The heart was set to the frequency that the dog needed. The heart said, I am not in a hurry. I am not going to drop you. I am carrying you and the carrying will continue until the carrying is done. The dog's ears were up. I know this because the dog's ears had come up on the pavement and nothing had happened since the pavement that would cause the ears to go back down.
Bruce's hands had been gentle. Bruce's lifting had been smooth. Bruce's chest was warm. Bruce's heartbeat was slow. The dog's ears had no reason to go down. The ears stayed up.
The ears were up as Bruce walked around the corner and the ears were up as Bruce walked down the street and the ears were up as Bruce walked into wherever Bruce walked and the witness didn't see and the chain doesn't carry.
The ears stayed up. I hold on to that.
In the absence of everything else, the chain has lost the restaurant name, the street name, the date, the breed of the dog, the word Bruce spoke to the stocky man, the destination Bruce walked to. In the absence of all of that, I hold on to the ears.
The ears coming up is the one thing I will not let the chain lose. The ears coming up is the center of this story.
The ears coming up is the proof that a terrified dog on a wet pavement in Kowloon received a man's hand and the man's hand was enough.
The ears came up. Everything else can fall away. The details can erode. The names can be forgotten. The dates can dissolve.
The chain can lose the restaurant and the window and the neon and the screws in jars and the brown mug with the chip.
The chain can lose all of it. But the ears came up. Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because my father told me.
I'm telling you this because my father told me twice, and things my father told me twice were things my father wanted me to carry.
My father was not a man who repeated himself. My father said things once. My father gave instructions once. My father made observations once. If you missed it, you missed it. My father was not going to circle back. Except for the dog. My father circled back for the dog.
My father told me the story in his workshop, and then, years later, my father told me the story in his kitchen.
My father broke his own rule. My father repeated himself.
And the repeating told me something the story itself hadn't told me. This story mattered to my father in a way that most stories didn't.
Why? I've been thinking about this.
I've been thinking about why my father, a practical man, a man who sorted screws and fixed things and kept a buffer in his pocket and did not throw money on tables, why my father carried this story. What about this story landed in my father's body and stayed? I think it was the crouching. I think it was the image of the most dangerous man in the world getting on his knees for a stray dog on a wet street. I think it was the contrast, the distance between what Bruce could do and what Bruce chose to do, the distance between the fist and the open hand, the distance between crossing a street to destroy a man and crossing a street to save a dog. I think my father carried that distance inside him. I think that distance was the thing my father's body held when the story entered him through the ears.
My father was not a violent man. My father never raised his hand to me. My father never raised his hand to my mother. My father raised his voice, yes, sometimes, the way fathers do, the way a man does when the world presses on him and the pressing finds an exit through the throat, but the hands stayed down. The hands fixed things. The hands sorted screws. The hands held coffee mugs with chips on the rim. The hands did not strike. But my father understood violence. My father grew up in a place where violence was present the way weather is present, not every day, not constant, but always possible, always in the forecast. My father understood what a man's hands could do. My father had seen it. And my father had made a choice, the same choice Bruce made on the wet street, though my father would never have compared himself to Bruce, would never have used the word same, would have been embarrassed by the comparison. My father had made a choice about what his hands would do. My father's hands would fix things. My father's hands would sort screws. My father's hands would hold a mug. My father's hands would not strike. I think my father heard the story of the dog and my father recognized the choice. I think my father heard about Bruce's open hands and my father felt the recognition in his own hands, the recognition of a man who has decided what his hands are for. I think my father heard about the forearms and the capacity and the 2.5-foot distance and the one word and the man walking away and the crouching and the hand extended, and my father recognized all of it. Not the specifics. Not the martial arts. Not the forearms built on a wooden dummy. But the shape. The shape of a man who carries the capacity for violence and chooses gentleness. The shape of a man who can destroy and instead kneels. The shape of a man whose hands are open. My father recognized the shape because my father was the shape. My father was the shape without the forearms. My father was the shape without the speed.
My father was the shape without the fame and the screen tests and the 1-inch punch. My father was a man in a garage sorting screws into jars with the labels in his own handwriting, and my father's hands were open, and my father's hands had chosen what they would do, and my father's hands did it every day, quietly, without an audience, without a witness in a restaurant, without a chain carrying the story of what my father's hands did. Nobody told the story of my father's hands at a dinner after my father died. Nobody said, he sorted the screws. He held the mug. He fixed the shelf. He didn't hit. Nobody carried that chain. So I'm carrying it. Here. Now. In this recording. I'm carrying the chain of my father's hands alongside the chain of Bruce's hands because the chains are parallel. The chains are two stories about the same thing. The chains are about what hands do when the hands have chosen. Bruce's hands chose the dog. My father's hands chose the screws. Both hands were open. Every chain breaks. Every chain, given enough time and enough hands, loses the thing it carries. The signal degrades. The details erode. The story that started with a dog's nose touching a man's fingertips on a wet street in Kowloon becomes, after enough hands, a sentence. Bruce Lee once helped a dog. That's the 20-hand version. That's the version you'd hear at a party from someone who heard it from someone who heard it from someone who read it somewhere. Bruce Lee once helped a dog. A sentence. The grain gone. The texture gone. The chewing gone. The money gone. The forearms gone. The crouch gone. The 6 inches gone. The nose gone. The lick gone. The ears gone. All gone. The chain breaks by losing specifics. First the specifics of time, the date dissolves, the year blurs, the era remains. Then the specifics of place, the street name goes, the restaurant name goes, Kowloon remains but only as a word, not as a location, not as a set of wet streets and neon and kitchen sounds. Then the specifics of action, the chewing goes, the money goes, the crossing goes, the stopping at 4 feet goes. The chain keeps the large and loses the small. The chain keeps the noun dog and loses the adjective shaking. The chain keeps the verb helped and loses the adverb slowly. The chain keeps the subject Bruce Lee and loses the predicate crouched on wet pavement with his hand extended, palm down, fingers together, and waited 10 seconds without moving while a terrified dog's nose crossed 6 inches of air. That predicate is gone by hand 12. By hand 12 the predicate is, did something kind. Bruce Lee did something kind for a dog. That's hand 12. Hand 15, Bruce Lee liked dogs. Hand 20, Bruce Lee was a good guy. Hand 25, nothing. Hand 25, the story is gone. Hand 25, the dog never existed. Hand 25, the street never existed. Hand 25, the man in the restaurant who saw it through the glass never existed. The chain has broken completely and the links are scattered and the story is dust. Unless someone writes it down. Unless someone takes the 4-hand version, the version with the grain, the version with the chewing and the money and the forearms and the crouch and the nose and the lick and the ears, and fixes it. Pins it. Puts it in a form that doesn't degrade. A form that doesn't depend on a mouth and an ear and a memory. A form that exists outside the body. A form that can be found. This is what I'm doing. This is why I'm here. In this room. With this microphone. Talking to you. I'm fixing the chain. I'm taking the 4-hand version, witness, dinner guest, my father, me, and I'm converting it from the chain of mouths and ears into a different chain.
A chain of recording and upload an algorithm and screen. A chain that doesn't depend on memory. A chain that doesn't lose the lick. But I told you earlier, this chain loses something too. Every chain loses something. The mouth and ear chain loses specifics. The recording and screen chain loses something else. The recording and screen chain loses the room. Loses my father's workshop and the smell of the concrete floor and the sound of a screw dropping into a jar. Loses the kitchen at midnight and the cold coffee and the brown mug with the chip. Loses my father's face when he said the years came up. Loses the way my father's hands rested on the table open, the way Bruce's hands were open, though my father didn't know the parallel and would have denied it. This chain, the chain you're in right now, the chain of my voice in your ears, this chain carries the words. The words are accurate. The words are the forehand version, preserved. But the words are not the room. The words are not my father. The words are not the stool in the workshop or the table in the kitchen or the screws in jars or the chip on the mug. The words are the words. The room is gone. I'm giving you the words because the words are what I have. The room is in my body, the room is in my chest and my throat and my hands, and I can't give you my body. I can give you the words. The words carry the story. The story carries the dog. The dog carries the years coming up. The years coming up carries the meaning. The meaning is, Bruce Lee's hands were open. The meaning is, my father's hands were open. The meaning is, hands choose. I want to stay with the years. I want to stay with the years because the years are the part that my father told me twice. The years are the part that survived both tellings, the workshop telling and the kitchen telling. The ears are the constant. The years are the detail that my father's body held tightest, the detail that my father's memory gripped with both hands, the detail that my father would not let go of even when other details fell away. The second time he told me the story, in the kitchen, years later, my father dropped the restaurant. Dropped the money. Dropped the forearms. Dropped the one word. Dropped the man backing away. My father dropped everything except the crouching and the hand and the ears. The ears were the last thing standing. I think I know why. I think the ears were the last thing standing because the ears were the proof. Not the proof that the story happened, my father didn't need proof that the story happened, my father believed the chain, but the proof that the story meant what my father believed it meant. The proof that gentleness works. The proof that an open hand, extended slowly, can undo what a foot did quickly. The proof that a terrified body can unfold. The years going down was the foot. The years coming up was the hand. The entire story, the whole 20,000 word, forehand. Two telling, workshop and kitchen, decades-long chain, the entire story is a story about ears. Ears that went down when a foot kicked a dog and ears that came up when a hand touched a head. Down and up. Closed and open. Fear and trust. That's the story. Everything else, the restaurant, the neon, the wet pavement, the money, the forearms, Bruce Lee, Kowloon, my father, the screws, the mug, everything else is the frame. The ears are the painting. Down and up. A dog's ears going down is the fastest motion in nature. Not literally, other things are faster, synapses are faster, light is faster, but experientially, in the experience of watching it happen, nothing is faster than a dog's ears going flat. The ears collapse. The ears don't fold gradually. The ears drop the way a building drops in a demolition, the supports are pulled and the structure falls and the falling is instantaneous, total, complete. One moment the ears are up and the next moment the ears are flat and the transition between up and flat is too fast to watch. The foot connects and the ears are down and you didn't see them move. A dog's ears coming up is the slowest motion in nature. Not literally, but experientially. In the experience of watching a terrified dog's ears come up slowly, 1 degree at a time, the muscles releasing their grip in increments, in the experience of watching that, nothing is slower. The ears rise the way a sunrise happens, you don't see the movement, you see the result. You look and the ears are flat. You look again and the ears are slightly less flat. You look again and the ears are at an angle that is not up but is not down. You look again and the ears are up. You never saw them move. You saw positions. You saw states. Flat, then less flat, then angled, then up. The transition between states was invisible. The transition happened in the spaces between your looking. Bruce watched the ears come up. Bruce was crouched on the wet pavement with his fingertips between the ears, and Bruce watched the ears rise, and the rising was slow, and Bruce waited through the slowness. Bruce waited through each invisible transition. Bruce waited through flat and less flat and angled and more angled and almost up and up. Bruce waited through all of it. Bruce watched a dog's ears come up the way a gardener watches a seed become a plant. Not by forcing. Not by pulling. By waiting. By being present. By having your hands in the right place and trusting that the biology will do what biology does when the conditions are right. The conditions were right. The hand was right. The temperature was right. The chemistry was right. The pulse was right. The frequency was right. Everything was right, and the ears came up. The ears came up. I'm saying it again because my father said it again. My father said it in the workshop and my father said it in the kitchen, and I'm saying it here because the repetition matters. The repetition is the chain's way of marking what matters. The chain repeats the things that the body holds tightest. The chain says, this, again, because this is the center. The ears came up. Bruce Lee died on July 20th, 1973. He was 32 years old. He died in Kowloon, the same Kowloon where the dog was, the same Kowloon where the wet streets and the neon and the kitchen sounds were, the same Kowloon where Bruce had crouched on a pavement and put his hand out for a dog that was shaking so hard its teeth were clicking. Bruce died and the story started. The story started the way stories always start when someone like Bruce dies, suddenly, from everywhere, all at once. The stories pouring out of every person who had ever been in a room with Bruce, every person who had ever trained with Bruce, every person who had ever seen Bruce move or heard Bruce talk or watched Bruce fill a room with his frequency. The stories poured out because the container was broken. Bruce was the container. Bruce was the thing that held all the stories inside, held them in the present tense, held them in the ongoing, held them in the alive, and when Bruce died the container broke and the stories spilled. Some stories were big. Some stories were about the fighting and the speed and the 1-inch punch and the time Bruce did this and the time Bruce did that. Those stories are the ones that survived. Those stories are the ones that got told and retold and published and filmed and mythologized. Those stories became the Bruce Lee that the world knows, the fighter, the star, the legend. Those stories became the fist. Some stories were small. Some stories were about a dinner where Bruce laughed so hard he choked on his tea. Some stories were about Bruce picking up a child and carrying the child on his shoulders through a market. Some stories were about Bruce sitting in a chair, not moving, not talking, just sitting, and the room orienting around him the way iron filings orient around a magnet, not because Bruce was doing anything but because Bruce was there, and being there was enough. The story of the dog was small. The story of the dog was told once, at a dinner, by a witness who had been in a restaurant and had seen something through a window.
The story was told and the story was heard and the story entered the chain and the chain carried it through 4 hands to me. The story of the dog is a story about the open hand, not the fist. The fist has been told. The fist has been documented and analyzed and replicated and mythologized. The fist is in the movies. The fist is in the photographs. The fist is in the posters on bedroom walls around the world. Bruce Lee with his fist extended, Bruce Lee with his fist cocked, Bruce Lee with his fist in motion, the blur of a hand moving faster than the camera. The fist is known. The open hand is not known. The open hand is on a wet street in Kowloon, extended toward a dog's nose, palm down, fingers together, offering nothing but presents. The open hand is 6 inches from a shaking dog and the 6 inches belong to the dog and the open hand waits. The open hand does not close the distance. The open hand does not grasp. The open hand does not strike. The open hand waits for a nose to cross 6 inches of air and touch a fingertip and the open hand receives the touch and the open hand stays. The open hand is the story that nobody knows. The open hand is the story that my father carried in his pocket for years. The open hand is the story that I am carrying now. I am the 5th hand. Witness. Dinner guest. The man. My father. Me. I am the 5th hand and the 5th hand is where the chain changes form. The first 4 hands were mouths and ears, the spoken chain, the oral chain, the chain that lives in breath and memory and the space between 2 people in a room. The 5th hand is this. The 5th hand is recording in screen and upload an algorithm. The 5th hand is the place where the story leaves the body and enters the machine. I don't know what the machine will do with the story. The machine has its own chain. The machine carries the story through servers and cables and signals and satellites and the machine deposits the story on screens, phones and laptops and tablets and monitors, and the screens show the story to eyes and the eyes send the story to brains and the brains process the story and the brains either hold it or drop it. Most brains will drop it. Most brains will hear the story of the dog and file it under interesting and move to the next thing. The next video. The next story. The next claim on the attention. The story of the dog will pass through most brains the way water passes through a sieve, present for a moment, then gone, leaving nothing behind. Some brains will hold it. Some brains will hear the story of the dog and something will land. Something will land in the chest or the throat or the hands. Something will land the way the story landed in my father's body, in the pocket, heavy, carried. Some brains will hold the chewing. Some will hold the money. Some will hold the forearms. Some will hold the crouch. Some will hold the 6 inches. Some will hold the nose. Some will hold the lick. Some will hold the ears. Different brains will hold different details. This is how chains work. The chain offers everything and the body takes what the body needs. My father's body needed the ears. My body needs the hands. The open hands. The hands that could close into fists that moved at speeds the camera couldn't track and the hands chose to stay open. The hands that carried the capacity for destruction and used the capacity for gentleness. The hands that crossed a street and didn't hit. The hands that crouched on wet pavement and extended toward a nose and waited. The hands that picked up a dog and held the dog against a chest and carried the dog around a corner into the part of the story that nobody saw. The hands that disappeared around a corner in Kowloon. I need the hands. I need the open hands. I need the image of Bruce Lee's hands open, extended, patient, warm, because the image is a counterweight. The image sits on one side of a scale, and on the other side of the scale is everything I know about what hands can do. Everything I know about fists and strikes and the capacity of a human hand to cause damage. Everything I know about the history of hands, the hands that have built and the hands that have broken and the hands that have touched gently and the hands that have hit hard. The open hands are the counterweight. The open hands say, this is also what hands can do. This is also what strength can do. This is also what a body built for combat can choose. The open hands say, the fist is a choice. The fist is not inevitable. The fist is not the default. The fist is what happens when the hand closes, and the hand does not have to close. The hand can stay open. The hand can extend. The hand can offer 6 inches of air and a warm palm and a steady pulse. The hand can choose the dog. I'm the 5th hand. I'm passing the story to you. You are the 6th hand. What you do with the story, whether you hold it or drop it, whether you carry it or forget it, whether you tell it to someone at a dinner or let it dissolve in the sieve of your attention, that's yours. That's the 6th hand's prerogative. The 5th hand can only offer. The 5th hand cannot control what the 6th hand does. But I'll tell you what I hope. I hope you hold the ears. I hope that somewhere in the machinery of your brain, in whatever place your body stores the things that matter, in whatever pocket your memory uses for the heavy things, I hope the ears land there. I hope the ears coming up stays with you. I hope you carry it the way my father carried it, not on display, not in conversation, not as a fact you recite at parties. In a pocket. Quiet. Heavy. There. The ears came up. A dog was on a wet street in Kowloon. The dog had been kicked. The dog was flat, ears down, body pressed to the pavement, shaking. A man came out of a restaurant. The man crossed the street. The man dealt with the situation. The man crouched. The man put his hand out. The man waited. The dog's nose crossed 6 inches of air. The dog's nose touched the man's fingers. The dog licked the man's wrist. The man's fingertips touched the top of the dog's head. The dog's eyes closed. The ears came up. The man picked up the dog and walked away and turned a corner and disappeared. The man was Bruce Lee. The ears came up. Carry it.